There are 7 phrases, just 7, that can completely shift the balance in a legal encounter. Most people never say them, not because they can't, but because they were never taught to. And that's the point. Because once you understand how language frames authority, you start to see where the authority actually begins and where it ends. So the question is, what happens when you use the right words at the right moment? So let's start with the first one, shall we? Notice. I am giving you verbal notice that I have withdrawn your implied rights of access to this property. You are now a trespasser. Please leave immediately. Or as I like to say, fuck that one sentence changes the entire footing of the interaction, because now it's no longer assumed access. It's been explicitly removed. And once that's removed, what replaces it? That's where things get a little bit uncomfortable for the other side. Now ask yourself, what authority are they actually standing on? Which brings you to the second word, jurisdiction. Before we proceed, I need to establish your jurisdiction. Are you acting as a public servant or a private contractor for a corporation? That question forces definition, because everything depends on the role that they claim to be acting under. And once that line's drawn, the entire encounter shifts from assumption to clarification. But where it gets more interesting is what if the authority that they're relying on isn't even properly evidenced? And that, my friends, is where the third word comes in. Proof. I require the original wet ink signature on that warrant. A digital printout or a photocopy is not a lawful instrument of authority. Now you're no longer debating, you're requesting proof. And proof changes everything. Because if the foundation isn't solid, the structure above begins to shake. So what happens if they continue anyway? That's where you introduce a consequence. Liability. You enter this property, you are accepting full personal liability for any damages or trauma caused. I am recording this for future evidence in a future claim. Notice just what happened. The risk moved. It's no longer sitting somewhere abstract. It's been brought directly to the individual in front of you. And individuals tend to think differently when personal accountability enters into the room. But what if the entire claim itself is flawed? That's where the fifth word lands. Dishonour. Your claim is in dishonour. I have requested a VAT, valid invoice and proof of a signed contract, which you have failed to provide. Therefore, there is no lawful debt. And this is where it ties directly into the Bills of Exchange Act 1882. Because under that framework, if a financial claim or instrument cannot be properly evidenced, it enters dishonour. So now focus isn't on enforcement, it's on validity. Because if the foundation of the claim isn't complete, what exactly is being enforced? And this is where most people never look. They assume that the claim is valid instead of testing it. But then there's another layer that most people usually completely overlook. Your data. GDPR. I do not consent to you processing my data. Under GDPR, I am requesting your data protection officer's details and proof that you have a lawful basis to hold my information without consent. Now you have introduced an administrative barrier, because data handling isn't optional, it has rules. And if those rules are not followed, ask Peter Wilson, then that creates another pressure point, which leads to the final word, the one that everything else rests on. Contract. Show me the contract. I have no agreement with company name or council name, and without a signed contract you have no claim. Everything comes back to agreement, because without it, what's actually binding it? And that's the question very few people ever ask. But here's where it shifts. This isn't about remembering lines, it's about understanding structure. Once you see how these words operate, you start to recognise the pattern behind every interaction. Language defines position. Position defines authority, and authority only holds if it's not questioned. So go and check the comments. Thousands of people are already testing this language, applying it, challenging situations in ways they never did before. Some say it changes everything. Others say it raises more questions than answers. Either way, something shifts. And that brings you to the real point. The system relies on one thing above anything else: that you never ask the right questions. And now you've heard them, what you do with them is entirely up to you. And this is where it usually breaks down in the real world, because people hear these words, they don't understand the sequence. They fire them off out of order, or they say them with no structure behind them, and then they wonder why things don't change. So let's slow this down for a second, because this only works if you understand how the words connect. First comes notice. You define the boundary, you make it clear, access is no longer assumed. Then comes jurisdiction. You don't argue, you ask. You force clarity on what authority is actually being claimed. Then proof. Now you move from words to evidence. You're no longer in conversation, you're in verification. Then liability. And this is the shift that most people feel immediately, because now the risk isn't somewhere distant, it's right there in front of them. Then dishonour. You challenge the foundation of the claim itself, not emotionally but structurally. Then GDPR. Something data busters, which we'll talk about on another show, can really help you with. You introduce compliance pressure, another layer that they now have to justify. And finally contract. You bring it all back to the agreement, because everything rests there. Now the part that nobody tells you about. You don't need to say all 7. In fact, most real life situations won't even get that far, because once 1 or 2 of these are properly understood and applied, the entire tone of the interaction changes. And that's really what you're watching for. Not some dramatic outcome, but a shift, a pause, a moment where the script that they expected doesn't play out the way that they thought it would. And that pause, that's where control starts to rebalance. But here's the other side to this. If you don't understand what you're saying, and you're just repeating phrases that you've heard online, you're not shifting anything, you're just creating noise. A noise gets ignored. So it isn't just about what are the words, it's do you really understand the words that you're saying and what it is that they're actually doing? Because if you do, you stopped reacting and you start positioning. And positioning is everything. That's the difference between somebody being carried through a process and someone who can see the process happening in real time. And if you can see it, well, you can never unsee it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Look after yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.